Two young wrestlers from the South changed tag team wrestling forever, but nobody expected their success to come crashing down so spectacularly. The Rock and Roll Express dominated wrestling in the 1980s, selling out arenas and creating a formula that teams still copy today. But when they tried to take their act national, everything fell apart. Their WWF run was a disaster. WCW buried them despite their legendary status, and decades of frustration followed. This is the story of how wrestling's most successful tag team became its most underused. It all started with an unlikely pairing in Memphis wrestling during 1983. Morton and Robert Gibson had absolutely nothing in common when Jerry Lawler decided to put them together. Morton, born in 1956, was in his mid-20s with teen idol looks that made girls scream the moment he walked into an arena. He had natural charisma that veteran wrestlers spent decades trying to develop. Gibson, born in 1958, was built like a truck with hands that could flatten opponents in seconds. He was a wrestler's wrestler who earned respect through solid fundamentals and punishing offense. These two men came from completely different worlds within professional wrestling. Morton grew up around the Memphis wrestling scene, where showmanship mattered as much as athletic ability. He trained under some of the territory's most respected coaches, who taught him that connecting with the audience was just as important as executing perfect wrestling moves. From his first matches, female fans noticed his boyish good looks and natural charm. He moved through the ring with fluid grace that made even basic wrestling holds look elegant. Morton understood how to work a crowd emotionally. He could make fans believe he was in genuine danger even when he was perfectly safe. His selling ability was remarkable for someone so young in the business. Gibson came up through a more traditional wrestling background where toughness and technical skill were the only things that mattered. He learned wrestling in gyms where veterans beat respect into newcomers through brutal training sessions. Gibson earned his reputation as a reliable performer who never missed spots and could carry weaker wrestlers to decent matches. His striking ability was legendary among his peers. When Gibson threw a punch, opponents stayed down. He was the kind of wrestler that promoters trusted to deliver consistent performances night after night, without drama or ego problems. The contrast between them was obvious to everyone in the Memphis locker room. Morton would spend time before matches making sure his hair looked perfect and his ring gear was spotless. Gibson focused on stretching and preparing his body for the physical punishment ahead. Morton talked to fans and signed autographs whenever possible. Gibson preferred to stay backstage and study match footage. Morton was naturally outgoing and enjoyed the spotlight. Gibson was quieter and let his wrestling do the talking. Many wrestlers thought Lawler was making a mistake pairing two performers with such different approaches to the business. Jerry Lawler saw something others missed when he watched Morton and Gibson work separate matches. He needed an alternative to the fabulous ones who couldn't wrestle in certain towns due to booking conflicts. Morton had the charisma and fan connection that could sell tickets, but he lacked the in-ring credibility that serious wrestling fans demanded. Gibson had the wrestling ability and toughness that hardcore fans respected, but he struggled to generate the emotional reactions that packed arenas. Lawler realized that their weaknesses could become strengths if they worked together as a team. Morton could handle the crowd interaction, while Gibson provided the wrestling foundation. Their first tag team matches revealed an unexpected chemistry that surprised everyone, including Morton and Gibson themselves. Morton's high-energy offense complemented Gibson's power moves perfectly. When Morton was in trouble, his desperate attempts to reach Gibson created genuine tension in the crowd. When Gibson finally got the hot tag, his explosive entrance into matches felt like a natural climax. They developed timing that seemed impossible for two wrestlers who barely knew each other. Their contrasting personalities actually enhanced their appeal because fans could relate to different aspects of each wrestler. The Memphis crowds responded to their partnership immediately. Female fans who came to see Morton stayed to appreciate Gibson's wrestling ability. Male fans who respected Gibson's toughness began to appreciate Morton's athletic skills. They created something neither wrestler could achieve working alone. Morton became more credible because Gibson's presence suggested he belonged in serious wrestling matches. Gibson became more popular because Morton's charisma made their team entertaining for casual fans who might otherwise ignore technical wrestling. Within months of their first match together, Morton and Gibson had developed the foundation for what would become the most successful tag team formula in wrestling history. Their success in Memphis proved that opposites could work in professional wrestling when the right vision brought them together. But Memphis was just the beginning. Their unique combination was about to face its biggest test in a territory where wrestling tradition ran deeper than anywhere else. Bill Watts ran Mid-South wrestling like a serious sport where toughness and realism mattered more than entertainment. His territory was known for hard-hitting matches and no-nonsense storylines that respected wrestling fans' intelligence. When the Rock and Roll Express showed up in 1984 wearing matching colorful tights and choreographed entrance routines, many longtime fans didn't know what to think. These two looked more like rock stars than wrestlers. Their synchronized movements and flashy presentation seemed completely out of place in Watts' gritty wrestling world. Traditional wrestling fans had grown used to tag teams that focused on pure wrestling ability without much concern for showmanship. Most successful teams wore basic black trunks and entered the ring with minimal fanfare. They relied on technical wrestling skills and physical intimidation to get over with crowds. The Rock and Roll Express challenged every assumption about what a successful wrestling team should look like. Their entrance music was Electric Light Orchestra's "Rock and Roll is King," and later Ricky Morton's "Boogie Woogie Dance Hall" instead of intimidating themes. Their ring gear featured bright colors and sparkles that caught arena lights. They moved with dance-like coordination that seemed more suited for a music video than a wrestling ring. Morton and Gibson's entrance routine became a spectacle that fans either loved or hated with no middle ground. They would run to the ring with high energy while their music played, slapping hands with fans and pumping up the crowd before matches even started. Their synchronized movements during entrances looked rehearsed and theatrical compared to most wrestlers who simply walked to the ring and got down to business. Some hardcore wrestling fans thought their presentation was too flashy and fake for serious competition. Others found their enthusiasm infectious and began looking forward to their matches specifically because of the entertainment value they provided. Their in-ring style matched their presentation with fast-paced offense that kept crowds engaged from opening bell to final pinfall. While most tag teams of the era worked slower, methodical matches that built heat through sustained punishment, the Rock and Roll Express used constant movement and high-impact moves to create excitement. Morton's athletic ability allowed him to perform moves that looked spectacular without being overly dangerous. Gibson's explosive power moves provided perfect punctuation to their offensive sequences. They combined traditional wrestling fundamentals with innovative techniques that made their matches feel different from everything else on Mid-South cards. Female fans began showing up to Mid-South wrestling events in numbers that promoters had never seen before. Wrestling crowds had traditionally been dominated by male fans who appreciated technical wrestling and physical competition. The Rock and Roll Express attracted female audiences who were drawn to Morton's good looks and the team's overall presentation. These new fans brought different energy to wrestling shows. They screamed louder, reacted more emotionally, and created atmosphere that enhanced everyone's enjoyment of the matches. Promoters quickly realized that expanding their audience base meant selling more tickets and generating more revenue. Younger fans also gravitated toward the Rock and Roll Express because their presentation felt modern and exciting compared to older wrestling acts. Children who might have been bored by traditional wrestling matches stayed engaged throughout Rock and Roll Express performances. Their colorful gear and energetic music appealed to younger audiences who were used to MTV and pop culture entertainment. These fans brought their parents to wrestling shows, creating family audiences that wrestling promoters had struggled to attract for years. Despite initial skepticism from wrestling purists, the Rock and Roll Express captured the Mid-South Tag Team Championship 3 times during 1984. Each title victory proved that their unconventional approach could succeed in serious competition. Their championship reigns drew consistently strong crowds and generated significant revenue for the promotion. Their consistent drawing power ultimately proved the effectiveness of their unique presentation to promoters like Bill Watts, demonstrating a new direction for wrestling entertainment. Their success in Mid-South wrestling established a new template for babyface tag teams that prioritized audience connection over traditional wrestling presentations. Teams across the country began copying elements of their entrance routines, ring gear choices, and high-energy offensive styles. The Rock and Roll Express proved that charisma and athletic ability could draw money just as effectively as pure wrestling fundamentals. Their formula worked because it entertained existing wrestling fans while attracting new audiences who had previously ignored professional wrestling. But their real innovation wasn't just about presentation and charisma. What truly set them apart was how they approached the actual wrestling matches themselves. Morton and Gibson revolutionized tag team psychology by turning every match into an emotional story that audiences couldn't ignore. Most tag teams in the early 1980s followed the same boring pattern that put crowds to sleep. Two wrestlers would trade moves back and forth until someone hit their finishing hold and won the match. There was no story, no emotion, just basic wrestling moves that fans had seen hundreds of times before. Wrestling audiences were getting tired of predictable tag team matches that felt more like athletic exhibitions than entertainment. The Rock and Roll Express studied this problem and created something completely different. They turned every match into an emotional roller coaster that had fans screaming, crying, and jumping out of their seats. Ricky Morton became the master of making audiences care about his suffering. His teen idol looks and spiky blonde mullet made him the perfect face in peril, especially connecting with female fans who saw him as vulnerable and worth protecting. While other wrestlers just took moves and kept fighting, Morton made every punch, kick, and slam look like it might end his career. He perfected facial expressions that showed pain, desperation, and determination all at the same time. When heel teams isolated Morton in their corner, he didn't just stand there and take punishment like most wrestlers. He reached desperately toward Robert Gibson, making fans believe he needed help to survive. Morton's ability to sell damage made crowds invest emotionally in his struggle. Fans genuinely worried about his safety, even though they knew wrestling was predetermined. The timing of Morton's punishment segments was calculated to maximize crowd reaction. He would start matches looking confident and athletic, showing fans what he could accomplish when healthy. Then heel teams would cut him off from Gibson using illegal tactics that made fans angry. Morton would endure several minutes of punishment while the crowd grew more desperate for Gibson to help. The longer Morton suffered, the more fans wanted to see his partner rescue him. Morton knew exactly when to show weakness and when to display fighting spirit. He could stretch these segments for 10 or 15 minutes while keeping crowds completely engaged. Morton's selling ability went beyond just looking hurt. He timed his movements to create maximum sympathy from audiences. When he crawled toward Gibson for a tag, he moved just slowly enough to build tension without boring fans. When heel wrestlers pulled him back to their corner, Morton made it look like his last chance for survival was slipping away. His facial expressions told a complete story of hope, turning to despair and back to determination. Female fans especially connected with Morton's vulnerability because his sensational looks made them believe he was actually in danger. Robert Gibson's hot tags became the most explosive moments in wrestling because Morton's suffering made them feel earned. When Gibson finally entered matches, crowds exploded with relief and excitement. Gibson had perfect timing for these moments. He waited until crowds reached peak frustration before making his dramatic entrance. His offensive moves looked more powerful because fans had watched Morton struggle for so long. Gibson's punches seemed to carry the weight of the audience's pent-up emotions. Every move he made felt like justice for what Morton had endured. The Rock and Roll Express manipulated crowd emotions through careful use of near falls and false finishes. Just when fans thought Morton was about to make the tag to Gibson, heel teams would drag him back to their corner. These moments crushed the audience's hopes and made them even more invested in seeing justice served. When Gibson finally got tagged in, his comeback felt like a reward for the fans' patience and emotional investment. The Express learned to time these peaks and valleys perfectly throughout their matches. Wrestling trainers started calling Morton's punishment segments Ricky Morton Heat, because his technique became the standard for building crowd sympathy. His skill at driving audiences into a sympathetic frenzy by convincingly selling pain gave rise to the expression "playing Ricky Morton." Countless tag teams tried to copy their formula by having one partner take extended punishment before making a hot tag. Wrestling schools taught students to study Morton's matches to understand how selling and crowd psychology worked. Their psychological innovation influenced wrestling for decades after their peak years. The formula worked because it tapped into basic human emotions of sympathy, justice, and triumph over adversity. Modern tag teams still use elements of their approach because the psychology they created remains effective with wrestling audiences. The Rock and Roll Express proved that wrestling success came from making fans feel emotions, not just watching athletic competition. But mastering crowd psychology was only the beginning. They were about to face their biggest test in wrestling's most competitive territory. Jim Crockett Promotions was wrestling's most brutal testing ground in the mid-1980s. This promotion housed the NWA World Heavyweight Championship and attracted the best wrestlers from around the world. Ric Flair ruled as champion, while the Four Horsemen dominated storylines. The Midnight Express terrorized tag team divisions. Dusty Rhodes drew massive crowds as the common man hero. Road Warriors demolished opponents with their power game. When Morton and Gibson walked into this environment, they faced wrestlers who had spent years building their reputations. These established stars didn't welcome newcomers who might take their spots on major shows. The locker room politics in JCP were legendary for their intensity. Veterans protected their positions by making life difficult for wrestlers they saw as threats. Morton and Gibson's pretty boy presentation made them easy targets for wrestlers who thought they looked soft. Their success in smaller territories meant nothing to JCP stars who had competed on national television and major pay-per-view events. The Rock and Roll Express had to prove they belonged among wrestling's elite performers, or risk being run out of the promotion by wrestlers who controlled backstage power. Their path to the NWA World Tag Team Championship began with months of grueling matches against teams that tested every aspect of their abilities. These weren't the regional opponents they had faced in Mid-South wrestling. JCP featured international stars who brought different wrestling styles and levels of intensity. Morton and Gibson faced teams that hit harder, moved faster, and understood advanced wrestling psychology. Every match felt like an examination that determined whether they deserved opportunities at bigger shows and more prestigious championships. The NWA World Tag Team Championship represented wrestling's most important tag team prize. Champions defended these titles across multiple territories and faced the best teams from around the world. Holding these belts meant recognition as wrestling's top tag team performers. The championship lineage included legendary teams that had drawn sellout crowds for decades. Morton and Gibson understood that capturing these titles would validate everything they had accomplished in their careers up to that point. Their first championship victory came against Ivan Koloff and Crusher Khrushchev on July 9, 1985. This match proved that their formula worked against established heel teams with legitimate credentials. Khrushchev was a powerhouse who had terrorized wrestlers across multiple territories. Defeating this team gave Morton and Gibson instant credibility with wrestling fans who had questioned whether pretty boys could compete against serious competition. The significance of this victory extended beyond just winning championship gold. Morton and Gibson had beaten foreign heels who represented everything American wrestling fans hated. Their triumph felt like a victory for hometown heroes over dangerous outsiders. The crowd reaction to their title win was explosive because fans genuinely believed good had conquered evil. This emotional connection became the foundation for their sustained success in JCP over the following years. Their reign lasted until October 13, 1985, but losing the titles only made fans more desperate to see them regain the championship. The Rock and Roll Express had proven they could compete at the highest level. Now audiences wanted to see them reclaim what they had earned through hard work and determination. This anticipation created perfect conditions for their dramatic comeback at Starrcade 1985. Starrcade was wrestling's biggest event of the year. Winning championships at Starrcade meant performing successfully when pressure was highest and stakes were most significant. Morton and Gibson's title victory at this event cemented their status as JCP's top tag team. They had delivered when it mattered most against opponents who wanted to embarrass them on wrestling's biggest stage. This performance proved they weren't just regional stars who got lucky. They were legitimate championship-caliber wrestlers who could succeed anywhere. Their popularity reached extraordinary levels that created problems nobody anticipated. At times, the company would run 2 shows in one night, with the Rock and Roll Express often headlining the B-team cards. They would often outdraw the concurrent A-team shows with bigger-name talent. On one occasion, this led them to receive a jealous reprimand from Booker Dusty Rhodes after they sold out Charlotte, while the A-team card with Rhodes did less than half the gate in Baltimore. Their celebrity status became so intense that they were actually asked to leave Carowinds amusement park because they were creating a mob and it was shutting down the park. Fans would hang out at their houses, and at the height of their popularity, the Charlotte police would station an officer at their homes to keep fans away. The Rock and Roll Express captured the NWA World Tag Team Championship 4 separate times during their JCP run. Each title reign built their legend and attracted larger crowds to wrestling events. Their success elevated JCP's entire tag team division to new heights and established them as wrestling's hottest attraction. But their greatest challenge was about to arrive in the form of another team with an eerily similar name. The Midnight Express arrived in Jim Crockett Promotions as everything the Rock and Roll Express was not. Where Morton and Gibson represented youth, energy, and wholesome American values, initially Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey embodied sophistication, arrogance, and cold calculation. The contrast was perfect. 2 teams with nearly identical names but completely opposite personalities were bound to create fireworks. Wrestling fans understood immediately that these teams were destined to clash in ways that would define both their careers. Their feud actually began in Mid-South wrestling, when Jim Cornette threw a celebration for the Midnight Express after they won the Mid-South Tag Team Championship. The Rock and Roll Express crashed the party and shoved Cornette's face into the celebratory cake. This humiliation created genuine heat between the teams that carried over when both groups moved into the Mid-Atlantic area. The rivalry had real history behind it instead of manufactured conflict that wrestling fans could see through. Jim Cornette's management transformed the Midnight Express into the ideal villains for Morton and Gibson's heroic characters. Cornette was a fast-talking, tennis racket-wielding manager who represented everything fans hated about privileged rich kids. He dressed in expensive suits while insulting working-class audiences. His condescending attitude toward fans made him the perfect mouthpiece for a team that wrestled with technical precision instead of crowd-pleasing excitement. Cornette turned every Midnight Express match into a battle between upper-class snobs and regular people. The wrestling styles of both teams created natural drama that enhanced their rivalry beyond simple good versus evil storytelling. The Rock and Roll Express relied on high-energy offense, quick tags, and explosive comebacks that got crowds on their feet. The Midnight Express used methodical technical wrestling, illegal tactics, and psychological warfare to frustrate opponents and audiences. When these contrasting approaches met in the ring, the results were electric. Fans could see 2 completely different philosophies of wrestling competition playing out in real time. Bobby Eaton and Dennis Condrey were legitimate wrestling technicians who made the Rock and Roll Express work harder than they ever had before. Eaton's timing was flawless, and his offensive moves looked devastating without actually injuring opponents. Condrey was a master heel who understood how to make crowds hate him through subtle cheating and disrespectful behavior. Together they formed a team that could match Morton and Gibson's athletic ability while providing the perfect personality contrast that made their matches feel important. Their first encounters established a pattern of championship trades that kept fans invested in their ongoing rivalry. Neither team could gain a decisive advantage over the other. When the Rock and Roll Express won the NWA World Tag Team Championship, the Midnight Express would find a way to take it back within months. When the Midnight Express held the titles, Morton and Gibson always seemed poised for a comeback victory. This back-and-forth dynamic created anticipation for every match because fans never knew which team would emerge victorious. The rivalry intensified when a new Midnight Express formed with Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane after Condrey left the team. Lane brought different energy to the partnership, while Eaton remained the constant technical foundation. This evolution kept the feud fresh, because the Rock and Roll Express had to adjust their strategy against a modified version of their greatest enemies. The chemistry between Eaton and Lane created new challenges that tested Morton and Gibson in different ways than they had experienced with the original lineup. Each championship victory felt monumental because both teams were so evenly matched in ability and determination. The Rock and Roll Express couldn't simply overwhelm the Midnight Express with their usual formula. Morton's suffering segments became more intense because both versions of the Midnight Express were better at inflicting punishment than previous opponents. Gibson's hot tags felt more explosive because he was rescuing Morton from genuinely dangerous situations. Their rivalry drew sellout crowds across the entire NWA territory system. Fans in different cities would pack arenas specifically to see these teams compete against each other. The matches felt fresh every time because both teams constantly adapted their strategies to counter their opponent's strengths. Wrestling promoters quickly realized that Rock and Roll Express versus Midnight Express was guaranteed money regardless of which version of the Midnight Express was competing. Wrestling historians consider their feud the gold standard for tag team rivalries because it combined athletic competition with genuine emotional stakes. Both teams understood their roles perfectly and never broke character during their extended program. But after fighting each other dozens of times across multiple years, their rivalry needed something bigger to settle their differences once and for all. The solution came in the form of wrestling's most dangerous stipulation match. Regular wrestling matches weren't enough anymore. The hatred between these teams had grown so intense that fans demanded a special attraction that would push both teams beyond their comfort zones. Wrestling promoters understood that extraordinary feuds required extraordinary stipulations. They decided to book the most dangerous match type in professional wrestling. At Starrcade 1987, these four wrestlers would climb 20 feet above the ring to fight on a narrow scaffold where one mistake could end careers or lives. The scaffold match concept terrified everyone involved in its planning and execution. This scaffold match between the two teams at Starrcade 1987 pushed the boundaries of what was considered acceptable in a major wrestling event, symbolizing the extreme hatred between them. The structure itself was a death trap waiting to happen. A narrow platform stretched across the top of the arena with barely enough room for four grown men to move around safely. There were no safety nets, no protective barriers, and no emergency plans if something went wrong. Wrestling fans had never seen anything like this before. The anticipation was mixed with genuine fear that they might witness a tragedy instead of a wrestling match. Building the scaffold required engineering expertise that most wrestling promotions didn't possess. The platform had to be strong enough to support four wrestlers throwing each other around during combat. It needed to be high enough to create dramatic visual impact for television cameras and live audiences. The structure couldn't sway or shake when wrestlers moved across its surface. Construction crews worked for days to ensure the scaffold would hold the weight and stress of an actual wrestling match. Even with professional engineering, everyone involved knew that accidents could happen when human bodies collided 20 feet above concrete floors. The wrestlers themselves had serious doubts about competing in such dangerous conditions. Morton and Gibson had built their careers on athletic ability and crowd connection, not death-defying stunts. Eaton and Lane were technical wrestlers who relied on precision and timing rather than extreme risk-taking. All four men understood that this match could end their careers if they made mistakes or took unnecessary chances. The physical danger was real and immediate. One wrong step or mistimed move could send a wrestler plummeting to serious injury or death. Crowd anticipation reached levels that wrestling had rarely seen before the match began. Fans packed the arena knowing they might witness wrestling history or genuine tragedy. The atmosphere was electric but nervous. People bought tickets expecting entertainment but feared they might see something horrible instead. Television cameras captured the tension on fans' faces as four wrestlers climbed ladders to reach the scaffold platform. The climb itself looked terrifying. Each step higher increased the danger and made the crowd more anxious about what would happen next. Once all four wrestlers reached the scaffold, the match became a careful balance between entertainment and survival. Morton and Gibson couldn't use their usual high-energy offense because the platform was too small and unstable. Eaton and Lane had to abandon their technical wrestling style because complex moves were impossible in such confined space. All four men moved cautiously while trying to maintain the illusion of intense competition. They threw punches and grappled carefully while staying aware of their proximity to the platform's edges. The crowd watched in fascinated horror as their favorite wrestlers fought for their lives 20 feet above the ring. Every movement looked dangerous. When wrestlers got close to the scaffold's edge, fans gasped in genuine fear. The match told a story of survival rather than traditional wrestling competition. Morton's usual suffering segments became more intense because the danger was real. When Gibson tried to help his partner, fans worried that both men might fall to their deaths. The Midnight Express couldn't rely on their usual heel tactics because cheating could kill someone. The match's finish required careful coordination to ensure all four wrestlers survived while satisfying the crowd's desire for a clear winner. Wrestling psychology had to adapt to life-or-death circumstances. The ending protected everyone involved while giving fans the emotional payoff they expected from this legendary rivalry. Nobody wanted to see wrestlers die for entertainment, but everyone wanted to witness something special that they could remember forever. The scaffold match became instant wrestling legend and proved that the Rock and Roll Express could deliver entertainment value in any situation. Their willingness to risk their lives for fan enjoyment demonstrated complete commitment to their craft. This death-defying encounter cemented their rivalry with the Midnight Express as one of wrestling's greatest feuds. But conquering the South was one thing. The real test would come when they tried to prove themselves on wrestling's biggest stage. Morton and Gibson walked into the World Wrestling Federation in 1993, thinking their legendary status would guarantee success on wrestling's biggest stage. They had conquered every territory they entered and held championships wherever they went. Their formula had worked in Memphis, Midsouth, and Jim Crockett promotions for over a decade. Fans across the South knew their names and packed arenas to see them perform. The Rock and Roll Express believed that national television exposure would simply expand their audience and make them even bigger stars. They were wrong about everything. Vince McMahon's WWF operated under completely different rules than the regional territories where Morton and Gibson had built their careers. The WWF prioritized entertainment over pure wrestling competition. Characters needed to be larger than life, with memorable catchphrases and distinctive personalities that translated well to television. Wrestling ability was important, but it came second to showmanship and marketing appeal. McMahon wanted performers who could sell merchandise, appear on talk shows, and connect with mainstream audiences who might not understand traditional wrestling psychology. The Rock and Roll Express discovered that their Southern wrestling style felt out of place in the WWF's entertainment-focused environment. Their matches relied on crowd sympathy and emotional storytelling that worked best with audiences who understood wrestling traditions. WWF crowds were different. They expected constant action, memorable moments, and characters they could easily categorize as good or evil. Morton's suffering segments seemed slow and old-fashioned compared to the fast-paced entertainment that WWF audiences expected. Gibson's hot tags didn't generate the same explosive reactions from crowds who weren't invested in traditional tag team psychology. Their regional appeal had been built on personal connections with fans who followed their careers for years through local television and live events. These fans understood their history, respected their achievements, and wanted to see them succeed against familiar opponents. WWF's national television audience had no context for appreciating what made the Rock and Roll Express special. New viewers saw two wrestlers in colorful tights who looked past their prime compared to younger, more athletic performers like the Steiner brothers or the Smoking Guns. Without their established fan base, Morton and Gibson struggled to generate meaningful crowd reactions. The WWF's booking philosophy emphasized creating new stars rather than showcasing established talent from competing promotions. McMahon preferred developing wrestlers within his own system, where he could control their characters and storylines from the beginning. Wrestlers who arrived with reputations from other territories often found themselves repositioned or repackaged in ways that diminished what made them successful elsewhere. The Rock and Roll Express faced this challenge when their proven formula was treated as outdated rather than classic. Their brief 1993 run in the WWF saw them defending their SMW Tag Team Championships as part of a cross-promotional agreement. At Survivor Series 1993, they lost these titles to the Heavenly Bodies, showcasing the challenges in adapting their regional success to McMahon's national product. They also had a brief stint in 1998 as part of an NWA angle, where they were awarded the NWA World Tag Team Championships before losing them a month later, but this run also failed to capture the magic of their earlier success. This defeat exposed the fundamental problem with their WWF run. They had become just another tag team instead of the legendary performers they had been elsewhere. The special connection with audiences that had defined their careers was missing. Their matches felt routine rather than special events that fans anticipated for weeks. The Rock and Roll Express realized that their formula didn't translate to every wrestling environment, no matter how successful it had been in the past. Their WWF failure taught them that the wrestling business was changing in ways they hadn't anticipated. Regional success no longer guaranteed national stardom, because different promotions served different audiences with different expectations. The territories had allowed wrestlers to develop relationships with fans over time through repeated exposure and consistent storytelling. National television demanded immediate impact and broad appeal that transcended regional preferences and wrestling traditions that hardcore fans understood. The WWF experience was just the beginning of their national television struggles. Corporate wrestling was about to show them even more creative ways to waste proven talent. WCW inherited the greatest collection of wrestling talent in the world when Ted Turner purchased Jim Crockett Promotions in 1988. The Rock and Roll Express came with that acquisition as established legends who had drawn sellout crowds and captured multiple NWA World Tag Team Championships. Their track record spoke for itself. They had proven drawing power, genuine fan connections, and decades of wrestling credibility. WCW had the perfect opportunity to showcase these proven stars on national television and capitalize on their established popularity. Instead, company management decided to systematically destroy everything Morton and Gibson had built over their careers. The corporate mindset that took control of WCW operated under the assumption that newer meant better, regardless of talent or fan appeal. Executive decisions were made by people who had never promoted wrestling events or understood what made territorial wrestling successful. They looked at Morton and Gibson and saw two wrestlers in their 30s competing against teams like the Steiner Brothers and Doom, who appeared more athletic and marketable. Age became more important than ability. Presentation mattered more than proven track records. The Rock and Roll Express found themselves treated like outdated relics instead of valuable assets. WCW's disregard for their legacy became obvious when the company only recognized their first 4 NWA World Tag Team Championship reigns, despite the fact that they had actually won the titles 9 times. This erasure of their championship history showed how little corporate wrestling valued the territorial success that had built their roster's foundation. Management positioned Morton and Gibson below teams that had accomplished far less and drawn smaller crowds throughout their careers. The dynamic dudes received better television time and storyline development, despite having no significant championship history or fan base. The Samoan SWAT team got featured matches while the Rock and Roll Express worked preliminary contests. The most shocking moment came in 1991 when WCW broke up the Rock and Roll Express in the worst possible way. Ricky Morton turned on Robert Gibson to join the York Foundation, a stable managed by Alexandra York that was supposed to represent corporate efficiency in wrestling. Morton even changed his name to Richard Morton as part of this repackaging effort that distanced him from everything fans had loved about his character. The heel turn made no sense from a storytelling perspective. Morton had spent 8 years as wrestling's most sympathetic babyface character. Fans had invested emotionally in his struggles and triumphs. Turning him heel destroyed that connection without providing any meaningful payoff for audiences who had supported him throughout his career. The breakup was handled with corporate coldness, that ignored the emotional investment fans had made in Morton and Gibson's partnership. There was no proper build-up to explain why Morton would betray his longtime partner. The turn happened suddenly, without the psychological development that territorial wrestling would have provided over months of careful storytelling. WCW treated their breakup like a simple roster move, rather than the end of one of wrestling's most successful partnerships. Fans felt cheated rather than entertained by this development. Morton's heel character never worked because it went against everything that had made him successful as a performer. His natural charisma and sympathetic appearance made him unconvincing as a villain. The York Foundation gimmick was boring corporate nonsense that had no connection to what wrestling fans wanted to see. Morton looked uncomfortable in his new role, and crowds didn't respond to him as a heel with the same passion they had shown during his babyface years. Both wrestlers were relegated to enhancement talent roles that insulted their Hall of Fame credentials. Morton and Gibson found themselves losing matches to teams that couldn't draw crowds or generate meaningful fan reactions. They became glorified practice partners for wrestlers who had accomplished nothing compared to their championship history and proven drawing power. WCW used them to make other teams look good instead of capitalizing on their own star power and established fan connections. This treatment represented WCW's broader pattern of misusing established NWA talent that had built the promotion's foundation. The Rock and Roll Express became symbols of everything wrong with corporate wrestling's approach to established talent. WCW had legendary performers with proven track records and genuine fan connections. Instead of building around these assets, company management chose to chase trends and demographics that they didn't understand. Their frustrating experience showed that corporate wrestling executives didn't appreciate what had made territorial wrestling special during its peak years. But Morton and Gibson weren't ready to let corporate incompetence define the end of their story. Their determination to continue wrestling led them back to the independent circuit, where promoters still valued proven talent over corporate politics. Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain Wrestling became their home base for the most successful period of their later careers. Cornette understood what made territorial wrestling special and gave Morton and Gibson the respect they deserved. SMW operated like the old NWA territories, where storytelling mattered more than flashy production values. The Rock and Roll Express fit perfectly into this environment because their classic wrestling style was exactly what SMW audiences wanted to see. They weren't treated like has-beens trying to relive past glory. They were positioned as legendary performers who still had something valuable to offer. Their championship success in SMW was remarkable for wrestlers who were supposedly past their prime. Morton and Gibson captured the SMW Tag Team Championship 10 separate times during their run with the promotion. Each title reign proved they could still draw crowds and deliver quality matches against younger opponents. Their victories weren't charity cases or nostalgia acts. They earned these championships through solid performances that satisfied both longtime fans and newer audiences who were discovering them for the first time. The independent wrestling circuit provided Morton and Gibson with opportunities that major promotions had denied them. Small promotions across the country wanted to book the Rock and Roll Express because their name still meant something to wrestling fans. These shows gave them chances to work with different opponents and adapt their style for audiences who appreciated classic wrestling psychology. Independent wrestling allowed them to control their own careers without corporate interference that had frustrated them in WCW and WWF. Morton and Gibson learned to modify their approach as their bodies aged and the wrestling business evolved around them. They couldn't move as quickly as they had during their peak years, but their understanding of crowd psychology had only improved with experience. Morton's selling ability became even more refined as he learned to generate sympathy without taking as much physical punishment. Gibson's hot tags retained their explosive impact, even though he couldn't perform the same high-energy moves he had used 20 years earlier. Their appearances in major promotions during the 2000s and 2010s surprised fans who thought they had retired permanently. TNA Wrestling featured them in matches against teams like the Naturals and America's Most Wanted. New Japan Pro Wrestling brought them to Japan, where audiences appreciated their classic American wrestling style. Even All Elite Wrestling gave them opportunities to perform in front of national television audiences during the promotion's early years. These appearances proved that their appeal transcended generational boundaries. The chemistry between Morton and Gibson remained intact despite decades of partnership and the physical toll of their careers. They still moved together with the same synchronization that had made them special during the 1980s. The wrestling industry itself began acknowledging their contributions through various Hall of Fame inductions. The NWA Hall of Fame recognized them in 2006, followed by the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame in 2014. And on March 31, 2017, WWE finally recognized what wrestling fans had known for decades when Jim Cornette inducted the Rock and Roll Express into the Hall of Fame. The ceremony proved that genuine greatness eventually gets acknowledged, even when corporate politics delayed recognition for years. Having their former rival and manager present them for induction created a perfect full-circle moment that honored their shared wrestling history. Every modern tag team that uses the Ricky Morton formula owes something to their innovation. Wrestling trainers still teach students to study their matches for lessons in crowd psychology and emotional storytelling. Like and subscribe for 100 Years of Luck. Until next time.